According to fitness experts, now is the best time of the year to begin an exercise regimen because the number of daylight hours are longer, which allows more outdoor time to run and play. Besides, they ask, who wants to be stuck inside a gym when you can be outside? Instead of starting a health fitness program in January when daylight hours are shorter and colder weather often causes us to eat more snack food, the expert advises that now is the time to begin New Year resolutions to stay healthy and start a workout training program. Especially with summer coming, hopefully. This is a good time to start training for hiking outdoors or going on long runs. This is also a great time to get in shape for road rallies and marathons, or to get ready for the Tough Mudder competition. The Tough Mudder, M-U-D-D-E-R, is a competition that consists of 10 to 15 miles that includes 20 obstacles that involve over 500,000 gallons of mud and 40 tons of ice. And you do get muddy everywhere. In Rotary, one of my friends, Renee, has competed in the Oxford, Michigan Tough Mudder competition for the last 3 years. And to say she loves it is an understatement. Karen and I went out for dinner with her one night, and all she could talk about was the Tough Mudder competition. And I will admit, it sounds like a whole lot of fun at first. It's a run filled with obstacles that are somewhat easy, like the rope swing. Just like it sounds, simply grab a hold of a rope and swing out, grabbing a beanbag and then dropping into the muddy water below. But that's only one of 20 obstacles. More difficult ones involve sliding into a pool of ice water and then walking or running, if you can, through 10 feet of shoulder-high icy water. Or there's an obstacle that one crawls through mud to avoid the barbed wire that is strung about a foot above the mud pit. Should have that. Yeah, there you go. The secret, I've been told, is to sink as deep into the mud as possible to get under the sharp thorns of the wire to avoid ripping clothing or flesh. And I know Ted's already saying, yeah, buddy, let's do it. These obstacles, for the most part, do not sound all that difficult, just really, really muddy and absolutely cold. However, the last obstacle is the one that doesn't sound fun at all. And it's the reason I shudder and hesitate to participate. The final obstacle is a mixture of water, mud, and electricity. Yes, electricity. And I love that image on that guy's face. Yikes. The final obstacle has wires that hang from the top of the course, and they're hanging about 3 inches above the surface of the water, and only some of the wires are hooked up to a battery. So as you attempt to go through the course, you don't know which ones are going to give you the zap until it's too late. The objective is to walk, run, jump, or crawl your way through the obstacle. But once you're through this, you're done. The finish line. When I first heard about this event, I thought maybe the zap wasn't that bad. Then Renee showed me lots of videos on YouTube of competitors who attempted to complete this final obstacle, the Tough Mudder, and were knocked down by the shock. By the way, some competitors do make it through, like Renee has done. But laughing at the misfortune of others, she warns, no matter how big you are or how tough you are, you will go down. In response to my question if the competition is dangerous, she remarked that at the beginning of the event you are required to sign a release from harm form and a second form that acknowledges you assume the risk of injury that participation could cause, including death. Along the course, these signs appear reminding you did sign a death waiver. Yeah, who's ready to go to Oxford? The Epistle of 1 Peter then reads like a release from harm form, stating that by choosing to follow in Jesus' footsteps or to be his disciple, you will endure pain, suffer unjustly, and in some cases, experience death. Peter knew firsthand the type of suffering Christians would endure when they chose to live a faith-filled life. And it's the same warning Jesus delivered in the Gospel of Matthew when he warned his followers, saying, "You will be hated by everyone on account of my name." The Apostle Peter and Jesus warn us that the Christian life is uncomfortable and will test our endurance. They warn us that following Jesus means we will encounter obstacles that leave us exhausted and muddy. But Peter reminds us, Jesus encountered similar hurdles and obstacles as well. He reminds us that Jesus, the living stone, was rejected by mortals. He was abused and suffered and was wounded. But his suffering is an example for us as we endure our obstacles. First, he demonstrated the need for us to build up our spiritual strength as we follow in his steps by adopting a spiritual exercise program that includes actively loving one another and caring for each other's needs and well-being, which can build up our spiritual strength. Our spiritual exercise program should also include praying daily as a form of praising God and an element of encouraging one another. Encouragement also allows us to give mutual support as we cheer for each other as we go through the obstacle course and follow in Jesus' steps. These practices will help us build our spiritual strength so that we're prepared to overcome the obstacles we encounter as we are and remain Jesus' disciples. In 1 Peter, the author reminded the early church that their endurance would be tested. He warned them that they would be tested. In the early churches, as they were young and thinly spread throughout the Roman Empire in Pontus, Galatia, and Cappadocia, they often found themselves at odds with the prevailing culture. Whereas Romans enjoyed the gladiator games where opponents were forced to fight to the death, Christians did not believe in these types of blood sports, and when they focused to attend the games, they were forced to become participants in the games. Of course, this resulted in many Christians being killed. However, even though the early Christians were threatened by acts of violence, they made the radical choice to not react with violence. They followed the model Jesus established for his cross-bearing followers. For Jesus chose to trust God, and as he loved humanity, he mirrored for us the fruitfulness of a faith-filled life. Jesus' love for humanity also caused the early church to focus their lives and energy on overcoming obstacles while also working to end suffering for others. And even though they are being persecuted and hated, they still provided for the poor and they cared for the excommunicated children. The prevailing custom in Rome was that when a child was born weak or the wrong gender, Roman families would simply stick the child outside and leave them to die or be taken away as a slave. Christians, however, would take the child home and care for them as if they were their own child. And it's weird because even though this was an act of kindness, the Roman population viewed this type of Christian behavior as a threat to the well-being and safety of the empire. Another prevailing social norm of the Romans and a major obstacle for the early Christians to overcome was the accusation that Christians were a threat to homeland security. Ancient Romans believed that for the empire to remain safe from their enemies, all residents, had to keep the Roman gods happy. This included sacrifices, shrines, idols, and images. However, the early Christians had none of those, and therefore they were deemed atheists. And to the Roman Empire, atheists were the worst offenders because they were not only foolish, but they were a risk to national security because their failure to please the gods of Rome could bring disaster to the Roman Empire. To be a Christian in the Roman Empire was a tough obstacle course. And their tough obstacle course is similar to the one we face today, where our culture pushes us to worship the gods of consumerism and wealth. It glorifies violence and it neglects to care for the poor and hungry. Cities today are making it tougher for organizations to receive funding and then go out and care for the poor and hungry. And they even turn those with food and clothing needs into panhandlers. And then they're trying to illegalize that. Some of our politicians claim pre-existing health conditions are your fault, and thus resources should be withheld and given to the healthy only. These are tough obstacles we face, and speaking about them or even assisting those whom we are told to ignore will place us in frightening and dangerous positions. But if we choose to take on these obstacles, intriguing things can happen. In spite of the obstacles, the church in Rome continued to grow. According to one church historian, he claims the church grew because of their patient suffering amid persecution. When Christians were being tormented and killed by the Roman Empire, observers saw that even in the face of terrible suffering, they remained committed to serving Christ. This caused them, these others, to want to know how and why Christians did this. They were also attracted to people who didn't play by the usual Roman rules. Rules that left people feeling spiritually empty and void of real living. The Romans were also attracted to learning about Christians because they always had their minds on a greater kingdom, a greater purpose. And this greater kingdom was the finish line for the Christian life, and it was viewed as the ultimate prize. Then, with their eyes on the prize, Peter says in verse 12, "Conduct yourselves honorably among Gentiles or unbelievers, so that though they may misalign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God." Following Jesus' footsteps means we will actively run this race and become involved with overcoming the obstacles, not running around them or even avoiding them, but engaging the obstacles so we persevere and thus win the ultimate prize. For Jesus, the prize was redeeming the whole world. Yes, that same world that crucified him. He believed, even when hanging on a cross, that everyone was redeemable. Thus he kept on loving, just as we keep on loving, so all can receive the reward of new life, which centers on the faith in God. As Jesus followers, we are encouraged to do our best to join him in the muddy competition and endure the tough stuff so we can share his loving message and care for others. After hearing about all the obstacles, the strained relationships, the risks of being bruised, and the pain you might encounter, including perhaps your death, if you're still interested in walking in Jesus' steps, then I just ask you to do one thing. Sign this release from harm form. Just sign here.